You've been mourning something for so long that it no longer feels like grief. It just feels like you, like a permanent part of your body, like a shadow you've stopped trying to escape. But deep down, behind the numbness, there's a quiet whisper you've been afraid to say out loud. What if that dream is really dead? What if it's never coming back? There are deaths no one attends, no funerals, no flowers, no one even notices. But you remember the exact day it stopped breathing. Maybe it was when you stopped praying for that healing. Maybe it was the last voicemail they never returned. Maybe it was when you stood in the mirror and realized you didn't recognize the person staring back. And people around you, they keep talking like nothing changed. They think you're still that same version of yourself. They talk about the future like you have one mapped out. But they don't know that something broke inside you, quietly, slowly. And now, even you don't know how to explain what died. But what if I told you that this wasn't a burial, but a planting? Jesus said in John 12:24, "Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much fruit." Most people quote that verse like it's poetry. But if you're living it, it's agony. Because no one talks about the moment the seed is actually dropped. No one tells you how dark the soil feels, how suffocating. No one tells you how long it takes before you even start to feel like there's still a purpose buried with you. You see, death isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a series of silent surrenders, letting go of the plan you built your identity around, releasing the relationship that made you feel chosen, walking away from the version of yourself you thought you had to be in order to be loved. And in that space, where the grief isn't glamorous and the silence is deafening, God is doing His deepest work. Think about it. Every resurrection began with something that looked like a failure. Lazarus didn't rise until everyone gave up. Jesus Himself didn't bypass death. He went through it, fully, publicly. And yet, in the kingdom, nothing truly dies unless it's about to be multiplied. You've been begging for God to restore what was lost, but maybe the answer has never been no. Maybe it's just been wait until it grows. The seed doesn't fight the soil, it yields to it, because only there, only in the place where no one claps, where no one watches, where the world thinks it's over, only there can God turn endings into beginnings. But that's hard to believe when all you feel is the weight of the dirt, when you've been faithful and still it crumbles, when you've prayed the same prayer for months, years, and silence echoes louder than words, when you look at your hands and realize they're empty, and the thing you were holding on to with everything you had, it slipped through anyway. There's a kind of sacred exhaustion that comes when you've buried something you love and didn't know what would ever rise in its. You're not tired because you're weak. You're tired because your soul is transitioning. You're tired because there's a war going on underground, a fight between what you lost and what's trying to live again. This is not your collapse. This is your cultivation. But the lie is tempting. If God really loved me, He wouldn't have let it die. That's the voice that shows up in the midnight hours, when your eyes won't close and your mind replays the same moment you'd give anything to undo. But God doesn't bury things to punish you. He buries them to transform them. Ask Joseph, thrown into a pit by his brothers, forgotten, misunderstood, accused, imprisoned. Everything around him looked dead. But what was dying wasn't his purpose. It was his pride. What was being buried wasn't his future. It was his false identity, so that when he finally rose, he wasn't just restored, he was ready. Some of you have been mourning something that isn't over. It's just underground. Hidden doesn't mean forgotten. Buried doesn't mean abandoned. In fact, what looks like delay may be divine protection. Because the deeper the roots, the stronger the fruit. God doesn't do shallow growth. He's not raising quick fixes. He's cultivating resilience. So maybe this pain, the one you thought would destroy you, is actually how He's making sure your story will save someone else. Because nothing hits harder than healing that came through fire. Nothing speaks louder than joy that was fought for in the dark. And nothing bears more fruit than the seed that said, "Even here, I'll trust you." you're not being punished, you're being planted. And that ache in your chest, that quiet grief that no one sees, it's the sound of heaven moving underground. It's the whisper of resurrection starting to take root, where the world said there was no more life. And when it breaks through, it won't just bless you. It'll feed others, because God never wastes the soil He buried you in. There's something sacred about the kind of pain that doesn't just break you, but reshapes you. When something dies in you, it doesn't vanish into nothing. In the kingdom, death is never the end of the story. It's an invisible transfer, a divine planting, and often what withers in your hands becomes the very seed that sprouts in someone else's life. You may not see it now, but there are parts of you that were never meant to survive the storm, not because you failed, but because someone else needs what only your brokenness can give. That part of your heart that cracked when the betrayal hit? It created space for compassion that can't be learned in textbooks. That chapter of silence you walked through when God seemed absent? It gave you a language for pain that others are too ashamed to speak. Pain doesn't just strip you, it equips you. Loss doesn't just empty you, it refines you. And when something inside you dies, it doesn't go to waste. It becomes spiritual nourishment for someone else who's starving for meaning. The disciples didn't understand this the night Jesus was arrested. They watched their leader be taken away, tortured, and killed. Everything in them screamed, "This is the end." But it wasn't. It was the beginning of a global resurrection movement. One death multiplied into countless salvation. One cross turned into 1,000 second chances. That's how God works. He never wastes suffering. He multiplies it. You may think your pain is private, but it's part of a chain reaction. There's a person you haven't even met yet who will feel safe to open up, because your story proves they're not alone. There's someone who's going to make it, because you chose not to give up. There's a stranger who's going to believe in God again, because you kept showing up, even after your hope was shattered. We live in a world obsessed with results, with speed, with instant growth, but God is obsessed with depth. He grows things slowly, intimately, root first. When He allows something to die in you, He's not destroying you. He's redistributing life. He's making room for others to find healing in the place where you once bled. Think about Ruth. She buried her husband, lost her identity, followed Naomi with nothing but grief in her hands. But through that journey, she stepped into the lineage of Christ. Her loss wasn't just her own. It became a bridge for the birth of something eternal. She couldn't see it in the moment. But her yes in heartbreak became someone else's future redemption. The part of you that died, the dream, the plan, the version of your life you once cherished. What if it wasn't the end? What if it was the ingredient God needed to start something in someone else? You see, when a candle burns, it loses nothing by lighting another flame. And when your soul has survived a furnace, your presence alone becomes warmth for others stuck in the cold. This is why your healing matters, not just for you, but for the next person who crosses your path. The one who doesn't have the strength to say, "Help me," but who watches your life like a silent lifeline. The one who sees your quiet endurance and thinks, "Maybe I can keep going too." Your scars are maps. Your silence is language. Your past isn't a weight. It's a weapon. And what you lost is exactly what someone else is waiting to find in you. We're trained to see our pain as evidence that God has left us. But what if it's proof that He's trusting us with something sacred? What if the things that die in us are actually offerings, seeds meant to resurrect outside our line of sight? You might never get a thank you. You might never know the name of the person you impacted. But in heaven, those echoes matter. They're the legacy that never posts online. They're the miracles that never make the news. They're the quiet harvest of a faithful heart that said, "I'll stay planted, even when it hurts." So before you write off what died in you, before you label it a failure, a mistake, or a waste, ask yourself, who might be living tomorrow because of what I lost today? Maybe your grief is the greenhouse for someone else's growth. Maybe your breakdown is their breakthrough in disguise. And maybe, just maybe, God trusted you to carry that death because he knew it would multiply, not in the way you expected, not in your timeline, not in your strength, but in the hidden, holy way that only heaven counts. You're not losing, you're sowing, and the harvest, it will come, pressed down, shaken together, overflowing, because God keeps every seed, even the ones we buried in tears. It's one of the hardest seasons to endure, when heaven goes quiet. You keep praying, but it feels like your words are bouncing off a ceiling made of stone. You search the sky for a sign, a whisper, anything to let you know God is still there, but all you hear is your own heartbeat, louder than your hope. And in that silence, doubt starts speaking louder than truth. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now, staring at the unanswered, the unhealed, the unspoken, wondering if God fell asleep, or worse, if He walked away. But what if you've misunderstood the silence? What if God's silence isn't the sound of absence, but the hum of activity so sacred, so intricate, so heavy with glory, that words would only interrupt it? In John 11, Jesus hears that Lazarus, his friend, is dying. Everyone expects him to move, fast. After all, he had healed strangers. He had spoken life into total darkness. But this time, when it was someone close to him, someone he loved, he waits. 2 days, no explanation, no movement, no miracles, just silence. To those watching, it looked like he didn't care, like he was too late. But what they didn't know is that he was preparing a resurrection, not a rescue, a revelation, not just relief. And if he had come sooner, they would have only known him as healer. But because he delayed, they got to see him as the resurrection and the life. This is the rhythm of heaven. It doesn't rush, it doesn't panic, it prepares. God's silence is not stillness, it's construction. While you're waiting, He's weaving. While you're doubting, He's designing. While you're pacing the floor, He's positioning the breakthrough in a way that will mean more than if it came on demand. Think about seed. They make no sound when they grow. The soil doesn't vibrate. The ground doesn't glow. But under the surface, something radical is taking place. Roots are forming. Foundations are stabilizing. And long before you ever see a leaf break through, the most important work is already done. That's how God moved. Unseen, unheard, unstoppable. Some of God's greatest miracles arrive in silence. The kind of silence that feels like abandonment, but is really divine choreography. The kind that hides you, not to forget you, but to protect what He's developing in you. If God had responded to every cry the moment you uttered it, you wouldn't be where you are right now. You wouldn't have developed that depth. You wouldn't have gained that discernment. You wouldn't have learned how to walk by faith instead of sight. Silence teaches things success never can. It purifies your motives. It breaks your dependence on feelings. It builds your capacity to carry what's coming next. Sometimes God withholds His voice to deepen your hearing. Sometimes He holds back His hand to strengthen your trust. And sometimes, just sometimes, His silence is actually His yes, disguised as a slow unfolding. There's something sacred in the delay. Because delay isn't denial. It's preparation. It's maturity. It's the space between what you thought you needed and what God knew you truly did. Ask Abraham. He waited decades for a son. Ask Joseph. He sat in prison for years with nothing but a promise. Ask Mary and Martha. They buried their brother while Jesus stayed away. And yet, in all these stories, the silence was never the ending. It was the setup. God has a way of showing up at what we think is the worst moment, only to reveal it was the right one all along. The last second before the collapse becomes the first second of your comeback. The tear you cried thinking He was gone turns out to be the one that broke heaven open. He doesn't need noise to be near. He doesn't need lightning to be working. He just needs your surrender, even in the quiet. So if God is silent right now, it's not because He forgot you. It's because He remembers you so well that He's preparing an answer too big for your current understanding. He's orchestrating something that will not only bless you, but leave others speechless. Because when God moves after the silence, no one gets the glory but Him. There's a strange beauty in brokenness. the kind of beauty the world overlooks, but heaven treasures, because only those who have been shattered understand the sacred art of waiting in silence. And only those who've waited in silence can truly recognize the voice that breaks it. When Jesus finally arrived in Bethany, Lazarus was already dead. 4 days. That wasn't just a delay, it was insult to injury. In Jewish tradition, the spirit was believed to linger for 3 days. By day 4, all hope was buried, final, sealed, smelling of decay. Martha ran to meet him. She didn't hold back her disappointment. "Lord, if you had been here," it wasn't just grief speaking, it was betrayal. The kind that comes when someone you trusted doesn't show up, when their silence feels louder than your suffering. But notice what Jesus does. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't justify the delay. He looks her in the eyes and says, "Your brother will rise again." Not might, not maybe, will. Because when God delays, it's not because he doesn't have power. It's because he's waiting for the moment when his power will make the deepest impact. And then there's Mary. Unlike Martha, she doesn't go out to meet Jesus. She stays behind, overwhelmed. The same Mary who once sat at his feet, who poured out perfume worth a year's salary in worship, now can't even lift her head. She doesn't ask for a miracle. She doesn't speak in faith. She just weeps. And what does Jesus do? He weeps with her, the Son of God, the resurrection and the life. The one who knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead still stopped to feel her sorrow. Because God doesn't rush through your pain just to get to the miracle. He meets you inside it. Before he changes your situation, he sits with you in it. He weeps because you weep. He feels because you're feeling. And he walks slowly, not because he's hesitant, but because he's holy, holy enough to honor your heartbreak, holy enough to let your pain breathe, holy enough to wait until the moment the miracle will mean more than the memory of your suffering. And then he goes to the tomb. But before he speaks life, he says something strange. Take away the stone. He could have done it himself, with a word, a breath, a thought, but he tells them to do it. Because God won't always remove the obstacle. Sometimes he'll call you to move what you can, so he can move what you can't. Take away the stone. Remove the thing that smells like death. Expose the place where hope was buried. Uncover what you were trying to forget. It's terrifying. To roll back the stone on a part of your life you already grieved. To open the tomb of something you told yourself was over. But until you face what's rotting, you'll never see what God is resurrecting. Lazarus didn't just wake up. He walked out, wrapped in grave clothes, stumbling into light, still smelling like death, but alive. That's how God works. He doesn't just speak to your potential. He calls you from your lowest. He doesn't wait until you've cleaned up. He walks straight into the mess. He doesn't say, "Come when you're ready." He says, "Come forth, now." And just like Lazarus, many of us come out still bound, still wrapped in the garments of our grief, still marked by the trauma, but alive. That's the beginning. Because resurrection isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. God is not just trying to get you through something. He's trying to give birth to something, a testimony, a transformation, a version of you that knows him in a way comfort never could. That's why the silence hurt so deeply. That's why the waiting felt like abandonment, because it was the womb of something greater. And now, the stone is being rolled away. You may not see the full picture. You may still feel the sting, but something in you has started breathing again. And heaven, the same heaven that once stood silent, is now echoing with purpose. You thought the silence was rejection. You thought the delay was denial, but now you realize it was preparation, not just for a miracle, but for a transformation so personal, so precise, it could only be authored by the God who knows the deepest parts of you. Lazarus didn't just come back to life. He became living proof that death doesn't get the final word. And maybe that's what this was all about. Not to destroy you, not to abandon you, but to redefine you. Because something happens when you walk out of a grave you thought you'd never leave. You start seeing the world differently. People say you're alive, but they don't know what it cost you. They celebrate the outcome, but they didn't feel the cold of the tomb or the ache of those silent nights when heaven felt 1,000 miles away. And yet, you didn't stay buried, because what God allows to die is never the end of the story. It's the soil of something eternal. You see, the silence of God isn't passive. It's surgical. It cuts away the noise, the distraction, the false comfort, until only faith remains. And in that holy quiet, God is building something unshakable in you. You don't come out of that kind of silence the same. You stop begging for what you used to chase. You stop measuring God's love by how fast He moves. You stop performing for people who wouldn't wait one day, much less 4. Because now you know, if God is quiet, it means He's working deeper than anyone else would dare go. That's why this story had to unfold the way it did. If Jesus had arrived earlier, Lazarus would have been healed. But if He arrives later, Lazarus is resurrected. Which one do you think leaves a bigger mark on eternity? Healing shows God's kindness. Resurrection shows His glory. So maybe what you thought was punishment was actually promotion. Maybe the silence wasn't distance, but divine timing. Maybe that long, painful pause was heaven exhaling before speaking something new over your life. And now you're here, not just breathing, but awakened to your calling, to your value, to the truth that God never forgot you, not even for a moment. Do you remember what Jesus said in Isaiah 49? Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hand. Engraved, not written, not sketched, not temporarily marked. Engraved, which means your name is cut into Him. Your tears, your prayers, your agony, none of it vanished into the silence. It left an imprint, a mark, an eternal reminder that you belong to Him. You were never invisible. You were being carried through the nights of confusion, carried through the mornings of numbness, carried through the hours when everyone else moved on. But your grief stayed, carried when you couldn't pray, carried when you screamed in your heart, God, where are you? And if you're still breathing, it means you're still called. Not called to explain everything, not called to prove your worth, but called to live like someone who knows the silence didn't kill you. It anointed you, because now you have something this world can't buy. A testimony born from the grave, a faith forged in absence, a voice that doesn't tremble in the dark, because it knows who still speaks light. And that's what you carry now. You don't walk with the same stride. You don't bow to the same fears, because you've seen what it's like when God waits and still arrives. You've felt what it means when He weeps with you and then calls you out. You've lived the story where silence became the soil of resurrection. So the next time your soul feels still, the next time heaven goes quiet again, you won't panic. You'll remember that the silence is not absent. It's the sound of God moving mountains in the spirit before you ever see it in the natural. It's the stillness before the shaking. It's the hush that comes before glory. And now, you are proof that He never left. You are the evidence that His delays are not His denials. You are the living echo of a love that does not forget, even in silence.